Hey everybody, so I got asked about the drum miking for the Greg Bissonette video that we just did, and I want to talk about it, what microphones we used, where we placed them, what mic pre's we used, and then we're going to do a little bit of manipulating of sounds, listening to the individual sounds in Pro Tools, and running it through some outboard gear to hear how that sounds. Okay, so let's talk about the drum miking from the front here. The overheads that we're using are Neumann KM184s. These are great. I like using small diaphragm condenser mics because they have a lot of detail, especially for the cymbals. What we want to do is we want to capture the sound of the drum kit. These are pointing straight down and they're in cardioid, but if you angle them, if I would have angled them like this, they will grab a little bit bigger swath, okay, because of the angle. But we're aiming them straight down here because of Greg's setup. I tried not to get the microphones. This is one of the things about recording video and audio is that you try not to get the microphones in the way of the person. You'll notice in the video, the rack tom mic is actually kind of in front of Greg's face at some times. So that's why we put the microphone under the ride, which I'll talk about for a second. Normally I would put it on top of the ride, but I put it under the ride so it wouldn't be in front of his face. This is also a legitimate place to put it. Okay, so the mics here, KM184s by Neumann. Let's talk about the mic under the ride cymbal. This is a AKG 452, small diaphragm condenser microphone. And then coming around here, the mics that we're using on both toms are Sennheiser 421s. So we've got this here, capturing the sound, basically where the drums are. Let me move this out of the way here. So essentially looking at the kind of the center of the drum where Greg is hitting, you can see right there. Same thing here. This microphone's looking at the center of the drum. You got to always think about the microphone where it looks. See some moon gel here, deadening it a little bit. And then we have a little bit of black gaff tape deadening that. The snare drum has a Shure SM57, very common to use on the top and bottom. The microphone, once again, is pointing towards the center. You see the black gaff tape is deadening it. It's a nice crisp sound, hard for me to say. This is a Keplinger snare, 14x7. It's a really great sounding steel snare. It's the one Matt Cameron used on Super Unknown. Not the exact one, but the same style. The snare bottom mic is positioned about the same place, kind of hard to see here, but once again, it's about the same distance away from the snare as the top mic is. Okay, top mic might be a little bit closer. That's so that the phase relationship between the two, we flip the bottom one out of phase, or sometimes you flip the top one out of phase, but those two are we've switched the polarity on the mics, so because they're looking in different directions, and you need to do that, otherwise it'll sound really thin. Okay, the hi-hat, we're using another AKG 452, great small diaphragm condenser. These are old mics. I bought these years and years ago. These are from probably the 80s. They have interchangeable capsules. These are cardioid capsules that screw on. You'll notice that we have the second snare drum here, auxiliary snare. This particular snare is a Dixon snare. You'll notice it's plexiglass. We're using it like a timbali. It happens to be very highly tuned, and we're miking it in the exact same way as we're miking the other snare. Okay. Now let's come around to the kick drum. Come on around here, Tom. The kick drum microphones on the outside of the kick, right here, I'm using a very old AKG D30. It's actually a D36, but that's a figure 8 D30. Very hard mic to find. This is something that you would find on Led Zeppelin records. That's what they would use for a kick out. And on the kick in, I'm using an RE20. Which is a common mic to use for radio broadcasters. That's by Electro Voice. So that's the drum miking. It's actually very simple. The two room mics are U47 style tube mics. These are Perlmans. And they are just looking at the kit, capturing a picture of it. And that's going to give us a lot of the ambience from the room. This is a very live room. I have a lav on, otherwise you would just hear a lot of echo. Let's go into the control room. Okay, this is GL. He recorded the session. We're going to talk about what mic pre's we used and some of the EQing. GL, you want to talk about this?
Sure. So this is our Neve rack right here. We have BAE Neve style 1073s and 1066s here and 1032s. And then we have original Neve 1081s right here. So we have 10 Neve style EQs. And for the kick in and kick out, we have them on the 1073s, just a little bit of gain, just a tiny bit of EQ to add little top end.
Well, let's talk about the EQ. We're dipping some mid-range out at about 360 hertz, and we're boosting a little bit of low end around 60 hertz.
Exactly right.
On both of those, the kick in and the kick out. The snare.
A snare is going through the 1073s as well. And then no EQ on those guys, but they're getting some gain. They're being sent over to the API 550A EQs. And just a little bit to top end on those guys. Now, the reason why I use the API 550As is because the top end is just really great on getting that 7K crack out of the snare. So I'm doing that with both the top and the bottom, and then adding a little bit of 200 hertz on both, just a little bit, just to give it a little body. For the hat, we're going through a Burl B1D mic preamp. There's no EQ on it, so it's just, it's just getting gain. The ride is the same thing, going through the B1D.
With the polarity reversed, because it's facing a different direction than the overheads.
Yep. The rooms are going through the Sunset Sound mic preamps, and just getting a little gain, no EQ for those guys. Back over here to where we have the toms, we have the rack tom going through the BAE 1032 mic preamp, and we're adding a little top end. As far as EQ, we're adding a little top end to that. We're taking a little mid-range out, and then just adding a little bit of low end at 100 hertz. But it doesn't really need it, because that's
when you say mid-range, what are you taking?
The 490.
490 on the rack tom, and about 470 on the floor tom.
Yep, exactly.
That just takes away some of the boxiness of it.
Same thing with the floor tom. Yep. So that's it. And then we have the timbales going through the Helios 0011 mic preamps. There's the top and the bottom. And we have the bottom flipped out of phase for the same reason, so that because the microphone's coming up from the bottom, going, when it gets hit, the sound is going down, and that one needs to be pointed up, and we have the phase flipped on that guy. So that's about it. That's all our preamps that we're using.
Okay, before we look at the tracks, let me play you the drum sound that we settled on for the video with Greg playing. I thought that was a great drum sound for the video. What I wanted to experiment with today in the video is actually using some more compression on the room mics to see if we can make it sound a little bit more aggressive, or see what it does to it, or if we really kind of nailed it for the video. Okay, now we're going to take a look at what plugins we're using here. GL's using very few plugins, but some important ones, and we're using a couple pieces of outboard gear. Actually, just one piece of outboard gear. GL, you want to talk about this, what you're using on each different instrument?
Yeah, so we have all of the tracks coming in, like we have kick in, kick out, all the same tracks that we just talked about. They're all coming in, and they're all getting bussed to a drum sub up here. And that way I can control the volume of the entire drum kit as a whole, and everything gets processed and stays time aligned.
Okay, so now GL's going to talk about what plugins we're using. We're going to start with the drum sub. All the drums are going through a drum sub. They're all being bussed there, so we have control over the levels of the entire drum kit. He's got a couple plugins on there. The first one here
is Steven Slate Virtual Mix Rack. And the only thing we're using in this is a virtual channel. So it's basically emulating a console, having a big console on our desk. And then we're going to a tape machine, and it's just emulating a tape machine. And then we've got those two things. And it's
Wait, why are you doing that though?
Why are we doing the virtual tape machine?
Yeah, why do you do the two things? I mean, I know why, but you can explain.
Well, I want the sound of the consoles,
right,
to make it sound like
we're not using a console.
Yeah, we don't have a console here, so we're making it sound like we've gone through a console. And the tape machine is emulating a tape machine so that we can get the low end out of it and just get the vibe of vintage and having a tape machine, you know, as if it were. These plugins do a great job of that. So we're using those two, and then we have a limiter here just at the end, just to bring up the overall volume. When we play this, you'll see that we're not actually...
it's not limiting at all.
Yeah, it's not limiting. It's bringing up the volume. You want me to play it?
Play it.
We bypass it. And actually, just so we can play the drum kit and show you what the difference is with these two plugins off as well, let's turn all of these off. And then we'll turn our limiter on to add volume. And then we'll turn on our mix rack, our console emulator, and then our tape machine emulator. Here we have the kick in and kick out right here. And the only things on them, very simple, not using much. We were using just a little bit EQ, and Rick wanted a very top-endy kick, just really punchy kick. So we just added a ton of top end here.
I didn't want a top-endy kick. I wanted to be able to hear the kick. And I felt like I couldn't hear it when he initially sent me the first version of it.
And then the kick out, we're just taking all the top end out. We're taking a little bit of mud out right here and just adding some low end.
He's taking the top end out because of getting rid of the cymbal wash.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you solo the kick in first?
That's with the plug-in on. Without. Back on.
Now play the kick out by itself.
By itself is this. And then put it in. Takes all that top end out. Carves out a little mid-range and just adds some low-end thump to it.
Then add them together.
Yep. Yep. Without them.
Sounds pretty good without them, but... Now let's take the snare top. Let's listen to it with no plugins on, and then he's going to gradually add the plugins and tell you what they're doing so you can hear it. That's a snare top by itself.
Turn the EQ on. Okay, we're adding a little 5.7K, just add some top end to it. Adding a little 1.8K for mid-range, upper mids, and then a little bit of low end here at 200 Hertz, just to give it a little body. Again, bypassed, and then with it. The next thing is this EQ, and even just a little more top end, a little shelf, everything above 4K, just adding a little bit of that. About 3 dB. And then the next thing is this smack attack, and it basically is just giving it a little more crack.
Compressor.
Bypassed. On.
Go back to the top on it. Without. In.
Just adding a little more impact. Just subtle. Snare bottom. This is with no effects. We're adding the top end, or the EQ in. We're adding some top end here at 7K. Just like we did on the API EQ, just adding a little more. And once it gets into Pro Tools, we find that, yeah, we're adding a little top end, but we want a little bit more for it to peak out through the mix. And then same thing at the bottom, we're adding a little 200 Hertz, a little 212. So that guy in, and then same thing with the smack attack again, just a little more attack for it. Here's bypass. And then these two together. That's without the snare bottom. That's with the snare bottom. And we talked earlier about having things phase aligned. So for us to zoom in and look at these guys, you can see that the peak is it's starting to go down here, and it's starting to go down there, it goes up. So we've got them phase aligned, which is why we flip the phase so that we can have a little bit more low end and everything's lined up properly.
Next, let's check out the hat with the EQ off.
EQ on. And what it's doing is taking out all the low end all the way up to 387 hertz. Just so we can get any kick out of there. We don't need anything down there. And then we're just adding a little bit of top end and then taking out some 500 hertz, 550 hertz, just to get some of the mid-range out of there. If I took this off, it's just that lower mid-range that's just a little honky. So we're sucking that out of there.
Next, let's move to the toms. What he's done is he's actually cleaned the toms where he's muted the spots where the toms are not playing so that it's actually cleaner and you don't have a lot of ringing going on when there's snare hits or kick drum hits. Both the tom heads will be ringing. In the past, you used to do this with gates, but now with Pro Tools, you can just go in and clean it. You've been able to do this forever. You just go in and actually clean. You mute the toms every place where they're not playing.
Yeah, it's faster and it's more accurate. I mean, I'm controlling every time that gate opens by doing this manually. For example, this is a section where toms should not be playing. So if I play this, all you're hearing is that snare just coming through like that, and you hear that ring of the snare. So let's get that out of there.
that can be nice in some situations, but this is not one of them.
Yeah. So let's just get that out of there. So that's why we manually gate things. So looking at it, that's what it looks like. We're putting everywhere there's a tom hit, we keep that available. We keep the clip highlighted and so that we can hear it, and then we put a little fade at the end, something like this. And let it naturally fade out so it doesn't cut out.
So play that whole little section there.
And then here, without EQ.
Sounds pretty good without EQ.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're just taking out a little bit of the honky mid-range.
Which we've already done, actually, when we were tracking it. We're taking out a little bit more right now.
Yep. And with this EQ, we're able to get really surgical and find that EQ point, that honkiness, and really pull it out of there. And I just added a little low end here just to give a little more resonance to it. And then the top end for the attack where the stick is hitting the head. Really, that's pretty much it. So here's without. And then here's with. And then the smack attack, again, just adding a little attack to it. You can hardly tell. Adding not very much at all right there. But that plugin is great because you can also extend the back end of it, the sustain of the tom. So if you want a little bit more length on your tom, or even on a kick drum that's rumbling a little too much, maybe we can take it out on the kick drum. We can take some of that sustain out of the kick drum. So we use it for that too. Floor tom, here we go. And this is without plugins. Let's do a couple of hits here. Here we go, with the EQ, taking out a little mid-range, adding a little top where the stick is hitting the head, and then adding a little low-end resonance again. That's it. And then smack attack, same thing, just adding a little attack to it. Didn't really need much for this. Let's move to the ride. Okay, here is the ride without an EQ. With an EQ, and the EQ is basically cutting out some of the low end, taking out some of that honky mid-range, and I'll play that mid-range cut without the cut in it so you can hear what that mid-range sounds like. And then adding a little stick attack up here at the top. So here's without the mid-range cut. And if you want to hear what I'm trying to get rid of, that's the sound of the mid-range that we're taking out. We can't hear it very well in here because it's not very loud. But, so that's the ride, very simple, not very much going on there. Overheads, same thing, not very much going on. Just a little EQ on it. So without the EQ, with EQ. I'm taking out this mid-range. That's a big difference. That's the noise we're trying to get rid of.
Next, let's move to the rooms. The room is actually a pretty live room, but it's still not live enough for my taste. So we're gonna talk about what we're doing here.
Okay, here's what the room sounds like by itself. And then with our first EQ, which is doing all of this right here. Bypass. Back in. So we're adding some top end here at 8.5K. We're adding a little bit of 2.5 for presence and definition. We're taking out some 468 hertz, just that boxiness, which sounds like this. Just taking that out. Bypass. Back in. And then we're just taking out a lot of low end all the way up to 69 hertz. But, that's not taking out too much. So if I bypass this, it's just getting those super low muddy stuff out. So there we go for that. The next is UBK1 compressor.
Oh, that gives you the room size and power.
Compressors are great for giving you a bigger room than you actually have. It's accentuating the room right there. So obviously off. Back in.
Huge difference.
Yeah, huge. Okay, now we have this guy. You want to tell him about this?
This is just a tape emulator. We're putting it on there just to see if it does anything.
Yep. That's in. Out. In.
I think it does something. I kind of like it.
Yeah. It's very subtle again, and that's the thing Rick was saying is a lot of these plugins are doing very subtle things.
Except for that compressor is not doing anything subtle.
But if you take all these plugins off, you're going to hear all the muddiness and all those subtleties that were happening. They're all going to go away, and it's going to be a big difference. Collectively, over the course of the whole drum kit, all these little moves are making a big move. So the next thing we're adding is just S1 Imager. It's just taking that reverb and just everything, the stereo image, and pulling it out to the sides just a little bit. So let's play it without it. In. Off. In. Again, very subtle.
Now let's hear what it sounds like all together.
Here's the whole kit.
Okay, so here's our drum kit without the rooms. It's just the close mics and then rooms. So that's basically the drum kit there. We're really relying on the rooms to capture the sound of the kit, the rooms with some compression, and then adding in those close mics for definition.
Yep.
Let us know if you'd like to see more content like this. Leave a comment. I haven't done any recording videos in so many years, really.
No.
But this is kind of our getting back to using the control room again.
Yep.
Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe.